It starts off with a young student who goes to London for the first time. She's brought up and raised in Cornwall. She's raised by her gran, and she's became not obsessed, but she became inspired by a period in the 60s where her mum and her gran just had the best time. At 60s in London. So her musical influences, her fashion influences are all inspired by London, the swinging 60s in London. And so she heads to London to go to design, fashion and design university college. And there she doesn't, because she's a bit of a loner, she's got a bit of a strange past. She doesn't get on living in the digs. So she goes and gets a bedsit for herself in the middle of Soho. And then she starts to basically encounter some strange things. She, in her dreams, she meets this young woman, and they more or less they almost like coexist, where her waking moment is filled with this character who inhabits her dreams as well, and she gets drawn into this life of the sordid side of 60s in the London in the 60s. So it might start off with like going to London to fulfill your ambitions of being the next Cilla Black and dancing in the Café du Paris and having this wonderful life with the swinging 60s, and then being dragged into a life of vice. And as you see our character in the past, her life deteriorates into this sort of vice-ridden nightmare. So our protagonist in the current, her life is being dragged into a nightmare because she's sucked into this alternative existence.
Ooh.
And things become a little bit undone for her, and things start to happen that blurs the line between what does she dream and what is real, and what is imagined and what is actually reality.
Timey-wimey, wishy-squishy.
Yes.
All right, cool. So now, okay, just from that, I think Sharon is essentially the queen of synopses.
No, 100%.
When it comes to this thing, Sharon is the queen of synopses. She's nice, she's succinct. She's like, yeah, that's it. That's what this film's about. And Shaun is the king of reactions. But essentially, from what you said about that, Sharon, that sounds to me like Shaun. It sounds a little bit up your street. Was it a little bit up your street?
Yeah, I've actually gone and seen this one again. So I totally loved it. I was totally immersed in it, totally 100%. Just I was there, I was in that world, and that hasn't happened for a long time since I've been at the cinema. So I mean, and I'm still thinking about it now, and I'm glad I went to see it a second time. I'm probably going to go see this one a third time. I love this film. It's just I think it's the best thing I've seen this year, definitely, possibly within the last 5 years. This is probably the best film I've seen.
Good stuff.
I loved it. I loved the atmosphere. I soaked it up. The soundtrack was absolutely terrific. I thought the acting was great. I really did think it was, because when I saw the trailer for this, I thought I wasn't too sure on who's the actress who plays the Cornish girl.
Thomasin McKenzie.
I should know that.
Was she in St. Maud? Was she the one in St. Maud? I couldn't remember.
No, she isn't in St. Maud. St. Maud is somebody else. But no, she's the one in
Jojo Rabbit and no.
Yeah, she's in Jojo. Leave No Trace.
Leave No Trace. Yeah, that's it.
That's
when I first came across it. And I just thought, because I mean, in Jojo Rabbit, it didn't convinced me to a huge amount, but I thought she nailed this part. For me personally, I thought she was absolutely brilliant in the part. She convinced me so convincing. I love this movie. Totally
Okay. So Shaun, with your whole pronouncement of this possibly in the best film you've seen in the last 5 years in the cinema. Now, Shaun has you love making lists and you love ranking things, and you have a running list of your best films ever. And somewhere in the top 3, I know there's Assault on Precinct 13, there's 71, there's Fury. So Assault on Precinct 13, 71, Fury, and now I'm going to throw Last Night in Soho there. Where would you juggle those in with those films? I know it's really recent, but hey, I'm putting you on the spot.
The Wild Bunch is probably my top one, but that
how did I forget about the Wild Bunch?
That would have to. That would probably. Trying to think now. That probably would be near 71. So I'd have to. It would be like, I don't know, but
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it's high. This is high. This is really, really high on my list. I totally sunk down into my chair and was absolutely
And
mesmerized.
you were there. You were there.
I was there. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So, Sharon, how about you? What were your reactions to this one? What did you think?
No, I thought it was, classy. I thought it told the story really well, where it does sort of blur that line between reality and nightmare. And is it mental health? Is it real? Is it just a sort of like a psychedelic dream? So I thought it fit the mood really well. I thought it genuinely had some shocks and some twists in it that both of us, we discussed this at the end of the film. We didn't see coming. And normally most of these films, I think what makes a big difference is the filmmaker loves film. So
yeah.
He knows the things we go, like you're signposting. We know if you watch films, you can see the end coming.
It's like that soldier's just pictured a picture of his lovely girl back home. We know what's coming.
You know that's happening there. And even though they had a bit like I'm going to introduce this one item that may become relevant later, like the typical, but they didn't signpost it. So I was thinking, that might come into effect later on. But again, normally these things are completely signposted. But if you know cinema, then I think, as Edgar Wright does, then he knows to avoid those things. So you do get a genuine twist at the end that neither of us had predicted. And I think that's probably why we both probably rated it really highly, because it wasn't conventional in that way that what's going to happen.
Okay, you see what's gonna happen now is I'm gonna go see this film and I'm gonna be like, okay, what don't I expect to happen? Okay, that's what's gonna happen, and I'm gonna spend the whole film second guessing myself and not even enjoying it because I'm gonna try and be that smart ass. I'm gonna try and be that smart ass who figured it out.
Yeah, so there were some really good moments, and I think there's probably one of those ones that if you watched it again, or if you had it on, like, you freeze certain frames and because there's lots of information is thrown at you at one point, and then it mirrors something that's going on in the scene, but I can't tell you any spoilers. But then you're thinking, actually, each sort of trigger point matches what you see. So there's like, you see something, and then there's a reaction. You see something else, and there's another thing happens, and you think they are linked. And the more you read, or because there's a bit of text, and you think, actually, it's connected. It's not disconnected. It's not a random event that's happening. It's connected to exactly what you're seeing. And so there's some really clever stuff. There's really good stuff. But I think the way they evoke the 60s was just spot on. I mean, didn't live there, and I wasn't before my time. But that means nothing.
That's like you imagine, isn't it?
It felt right, and you felt like there was, alongside this gloss, there was this tarnish.
We're talking about evoking the 60s. Okay, I've only seen the trailer for this film, but there is this one shot with a massive marquee billboard of Thunderball. With the Sean Connery James Bond film, and you look at it and go, yeah, that does look like another world. That looks like another time. It looks it feels. All right, cool. So with that, okay, people have called this a horror movie. How much of a horror is it, do you think?
I don't think it. I wouldn't really class it as a horror.
I didn't think it was horror.
I didn't think it was horror.
Right. There are horror elements in it, certainly.
Yeah, certainly were. But I wouldn't call this a horror in the conventional sense of, like,
But yeah, referencing St. Maud I mentioned earlier, I didn't think that was a horror film either.
No.
So people use the term horror because there's things that might be alarming, might be distressing, or might be sort of like triggers for some people.
Yeah.
So I would say it's horrific in its content in places, but it's not, to me, it wasn't horror.
I think that was Morfydd Clark. I think St. Maud was Morfydd Clark.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to. Okay, so now we get to the main thing. How many stars are we looking at?
Okay, well, I think it's pretty certain what I'm going to give it. There is one bit in it that could knock it down, but I'm going to overlook it. So this is a 5-star for me. It's got to be. I thought about it a lot, and I'm going to give this one a top 5, top marks.
Go for it, Sean. Why live your life with a break on? So, Sharon, how many stars?
Yeah, I'm torn between a 4 or a 5 because, my assessment of it is it flawless? I'm trying to think. There are no holes in it. So if on that definition has been without flaw, I'd probably be like Craig Revel Horwood. Without being able to spot a flaw, I've got no choice but to give it a top mark. So I probably would say, yeah, I'd probably have to give it I'm tempted. I want to say like.
I'll give you a big hug, big
because
hug.
I think it's an admirable film, but it's not a film that I probably would watch again because I've had that experience of it.
Yeah.
Whereas my favourite films where I go all warm and fuzzy about, I probably have a softer edge to them. So to me, I didn't respond emotionally to it the way I would my favourite films, but I certainly there's so much to admire. So, but I think I'll probably just bite the bullet and say because I found it just such a very, very good piece of filmmaking that I'll have to give it a 5.
Whoa! Look at that! Look at that! Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright.
Well, to get there, but I got there in the end.
Bring in harmony. Bring in harmony to the Netflix for Cinema podcast, and also making us realize that, and I never realized before that Sharon is our own version of Craig Revel Horwood. I never thought that Sharon is the meanie. Sharon's the stingy one who doesn't want to give out stars.
Because he always says he starts off with a perfect 10 and then he removes points for every fault that he sees.
Yeah.
And I'm the same, really. I think I want this film to be really, really good. And then as you start into it, you're thinking, no, that loses a point because it's not original, or that loses a point because it just doesn't convince, or that loses a point because it's just.
Well, you see, I tend to go in. I tend to go in feeling like, well, you know what? I'm expecting this to be rubbish. and then when I come on, I'm like, oh my god, it wasn't. I'm going to give it 4. Like Sonic the Hedgehog. That is still one of the biggest surprises of my.
Yeah, I enjoyed Sonic.
In the last 5 years, when it comes to my film watching, it's one of the biggest surprises. I was not expecting that to be that good.
Yeah.
And a little bit probably with Free Guy, but I mean, definitely Sonic is probably the biggest surprise I've seen in the cinema in the last 3 years. Right, okay.